Okay, let's see.
I think we're good.
We are live, I guess.
Perfect.
Yeah, the timer start now. Okay. So, hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us here today. We're so excited to have all of you here. Through these sessions, we hope that you try to get prepared for the solution challenge and learn the different ways we can bring our own ideas and turn it into a prototype or a digital product. So we have Bryce and Mike, who are some amazing speakers, and they'll be providing us some tips and the ways we can brainstorm different ideas and bring them into an actual live product. So do check this out and watch us and ask questions that you have. So Mike and Bryce, the stage is all yours.
Thanks so much. So I guess I'll kick it off and work together with Bryce. Thanks so much for joining us for these series of presentations. As Sahil mentioned, we hope that this will be a great way for you to think about how you create products and how you transition really ideas into actual things and real products. We've done this a lot in the real world, and both in the real world and for hackathons and stuff. But the methods that we're describing today are applicable in the real business world and will serve you well when you get into the world and start developing products.
Yeah, and to kind of follow on with that, basically we're looking at 3 separate sessions with the idea of creating a repeatable process to make products that you really like. Right, that solve problems that actually are marketable to an audience instead of just something you came up with that just kind of sits there. So this is day 1, like I said, of a 3-step process or a 3-section process. And today we're going to talk a little bit about finding your why. So why is this product here and what does it do? And go for that. We said 3 easy steps. There's a lot of steps within that, so it's great to kind of follow along. But I think before we do that, we should probably introduce ourselves, Mike. What do you think?
Probably.
Hey, it's me, and it's you. So I'm Bryce, as it says on the screen. I'm a graphic designer by training. I've been building for the web for almost 20 years, maybe a little more. I think that makes me old. Along that process, I have also been doing a lot of strategy and a lot of user experience, as well as how those things relate to a business. So what makes a product profitable? How do you market that product? Why does anybody care? In addition to that, I work with Google's developer relations to talk about cool things that are happening on the web as a Google developer expert. And I speak and write a lot about these topics. Mike, how about you?
So I am also a Google developer expert, and that's how me and Bryce have been able to work together throughout the years. The both of us have done lots of different mentoring activities with student groups. We were fortunate to be able to to mentor a student group in Toronto during a weekend-long hackathon. The two of us together have been able to mentor both students and also business product developers through our connections to Google. It's been really great. As I mentioned, I'm an Android developer. I've also been working in the software business for 20 years. I've worked for many different big organizations. The last big product I worked on was March Madness, where we re-architected their whole platform. So hopefully you watched lots of basketball games this last season and enjoyed all of our work.
Yeah, so should we get into this? What do you think, Mike?
Let's do it.
All right, well, before we start,
there
is this kind of fun little scavenger hunt that we're going to have you do. It's really not that hard, I don't think, for most of us. But please try to find a piece of paper, preferably, a blank one that you can draw on, and then something to do said drawing. I prefer a Sharpie, but I guess if you want to prick your finger and draw in blood, we can do whatever you want. But we're going to need that a little later. So let's kind of put this out there now, start looking for it, kind of wander around the house if you need to, go back inside if you're out on a walk. And, we'll get to that at some point here soon. All right. So today we really want to talk about what we're calling discovering your why. And this isn't necessarily your why. This is kind of your solution or your idea or your product's why. What is this thing? Why does it exist? To do that, we've kind of got two pretty easy questions, right? So what problem are we solving and who are we solving it for? It's been my experience, and maybe Mike can jump in here too, but if you answer these two questions, you have a much better chance of getting a product that people want to use and that solves a problem, that actually solves a problem for somebody, instead of just creating something and releasing it into the world and hoping that maybe this time it'll be the one that sticks.
History is littered with examples of bad products that organizations have thrown lots of money away at because they didn't think through the customer or the product they're creating. This is a super great one. Coors Natural Rocky Mountain Spring Water. But guess what? There's no alcohol in that. That is not beer. That is not some sort of Zima product. It's just pure Rocky Mountain spring water, sparkling water. Turns out that people were really confused on why a beer company was producing water, and it was a huge flop. And it's pretty clear why, and that's because they didn't really consider the problem that they were solving, and also they didn't really consider who it was that they were solving the problem for.
Yeah, like Mike said, the world is just full of these things. So it's kind of our goal to help your product not become famous for not having an audience or a real value in the world. Well, how do we do that? Well, there are a couple tools that it's pretty frequent that people use. One of them you might have heard of. It's called a persona. It's kind of like your driver's license, right? This is a way to identify the people that are going to use the thing you're making. It could be as simple as a list of names and ages and things that people do and don't do. Personally, when I'm making a persona, sort of my pro tip is to think about what scares people. I have found that if you can list those things out, you have a much better chance of solving a real problem for somebody, right? That could be somebody's scared of social irrelevance, and you create some product that lets them be YouTube stars or something similar. It could be worried about their job performance, and you create something that makes them better or faster at their job. But paying attention to what is it that motivates people? And that's a great lead-in into our next topic. I'm not going to cover personas real heavily, right? The idea here is just that we think about who these people are. And we're going to give you an example of this in a little bit. Kind of the goal here is that that we know that we are making this for someone specific, instead of just releasing things to the world and hoping that somebody cares.
It's no longer the case that you can just, the Field of Dreams strategy, where if you build it, they will come. Historically, that's happened, and that's been pretty awesome. And if you were in the right place at the right time, you could create computer software products that just happen to be there. Right now, because the world is so vast, you really have to consider what it is that you're building and who it is that you're building it for.
Lucky serendipity is not a strategy. It's a thing that you do at the casino. And if your goal is to not gamble on everything, then figuring out who it's for is kind of the point there, right?
And of course, our goal is to create a framework, or help everyone in this presentation understand the framework to really understand what products we're creating. So we don't leave any of this stuff to chance, that we understand what it is that we're building, and we build it for the right reasons and for the right people. One sidetrack that I'll take, since I said they're building it for the right people, it's important to also consider people with disabilities. and other accessibility issues. Now, this may have some aspects to do with just making your product fine for everybody to use, but you may be able to tap into some hidden markets there, even unexpected markets based on finding people's unique needs that, if people have some sort of special need, that may be a way for you to identify a unique product that actually works more than just for those people, but makes everybody's life easier.
That's a great setup, actually, for our next slide, Mike.
Nice.
There's this guy, his name is Clayton Christensen, and he created this process that he called jobs to be done. Now, there's actually a book about it. It's called Competing Against Luck. He's kind of taking the same stance that I just did about serendipity not being a strategy. And he's saying, if you really identify why people want this thing. Now, when he says why people want this thing, he's actually talking about, like, what is it in their lives that this product or service or tool or environment or whatever it is that you're creating, what does it solve for them? Right? He's got this theory that we don't just happen onto things and say, wow, this is so amazing, it's going to change my life. We actually sort of vote with our money. And he believes that products and services exist to actually do a job for you. So when we say jobs to be done, we're actually asking, what would somebody hire this to do? What's the problem that's so big that they would actually bring you in or bring your idea in and use it? So we'll go through a couple of examples of this, but Christensen in his book, he talks about how it was Wendy's, actually, that they were talking to, that they make shakes, and they found out that a lot of people were buying shakes at like 8:30 in the morning. Now, that seems weird to me. I'm guessing Mike looks like it seems weird to him too. But
delicious.
Delicious, yes, obviously. I mean, shakes are amazing, right? Maybe 8:30 is just the time that you think about that. Well, they did a little bit of research, and they realized that people were buying these shakes because they had a long commute in front of them to work. All right, this is when people were going to the office every day. Many of them in large cities were commuting for, say, an hour to the office. Well, they realized that people were stopping at Wendy's and getting a shake because then the shake is nice and thick. It tastes good. It's not really what I would consider breakfast food, but it comes in a container. It's hard to spill, right? But it's also very thick and kind of filling. You can't drink a shake really fast. So people were stopping and getting a shake because it changed their commute, right? They weren't stopping and getting a shake because Wendy's advertising was so amazing or because they really needed a milk-based product in the morning to jumpstart their lactose intolerance or whatever it was, right? That it was all because the commute was actually the problem, and the shake solved that problem for them in a very unique and interesting way. Obviously, that's not a digital product, but the same kind of ideas apply. So when we're trying to come up with this job to be done, there's sort of 3 rules, if you will, about how you define these jobs. So 1, it should be solution agnostic. That means that you shouldn't limit your ideas to something that you already understand. I want to vacuum my room as well as possible. Well, that requires a vacuum, right? Versus I want a clean room. That's a solution agnostic. It should result in progress for the person who completes it, right? So I can check something off my to-do list. I can feel accomplished. Whatever it is, somebody needs to be able to say, hey, this was big. It was worth it, right? I did this thing. And then the other part that's actually kind of interesting to the jobs to be done framework is that Christensen says things should be stable across time. And what he means by that is that you shouldn't have to it shouldn't be based on some fad or something that's going to change and go away, right? I'm going to have to clean my room probably as long as I have a room, all right? Or until I stop caring that it's clean. That's not going to go away anytime soon. Even when the metaverse becomes the thing that's everywhere, my room's still going to be there. I'm still going to have to clean So those are kind of the key steps there. Mike, do you have anything to add?
No, I think you're
Jump
good
into
on
some
these.
examples. Let's talk a little bit about how to create these things. I love attaching ideas to things that you are going to remember. So now you're all going to remember that we talked about Sesame Street and the letters X, Y, and Z. And the reason we're talking about the letters X, Y, and Z is because I believe that a good description of a job to be done should include person X who needs Y so that they can accomplish Z. It's kind of nice because you can kind of keep track of those three little letters. And I'm guessing Mike is looking really confused right now. He's like, man, that's great, but what do you mean? How about some examples? And I actually realized that I swapped the bad and the good. I'll change that representation. But the first one is a good example, right? Office workers need time during daylight so that they can accomplish yard work. Something's broken, right? If you said I need a better rake or I need time to mow my lawn or things like that, again, those would be not solution agnostic, and they would assume that you need a lawnmower to do these things. It also kind of stops you from coming up with a smart outside the box solution. The not so great one, office workers need a print button so they can keep an archive of their work. I can't count the number of times that I've talked to a product manager who's been like, add a print button. Right. And the conversation that we have to have at that point is, well, what problem are we solving? I get what a print button does. I understand that it makes a piece of paper. But there's an awful lot of different ways to archive work. All right, I could print it. I could save it to a cloud storage drive somewhere for later. I could find a friend with a photographic memory and have them look at the screen. I mean, there's a million different ways that I can hang on to this for later. The print button is just one of those ways. So that second one is not a great example. First one is a pretty good example.
The only thing I want to add to this, or it's a little preview of our week 2 presentation, is that once we start to actually define requirements and isolate what it is that we're trying to do, we're going to use a similar framework to this to make sure that the requirements that we generate about our product are actually actionable and they're the right thing. So,
yeah, so shameless plug, tune in next episode.
Yes, we actually have. We will be building on this in the future.
All right, so we kind of talked about your why, and we're going to go into an example of this in a minute. But think of your problem as having a resume, right? Who needs this? That's the persona that we talked about very briefly. I'm guessing you can come up with who needs this. If you can't, should be a really big red flag for you. What job do they hire it to do? And then one we didn't really talk a lot about, but it is kind of obvious and straightforward, is what's the competition? Right? What other things can solve the problem for these people? You should be able to come up with competitors in this world. Believing that nobody does what your thing does is unlikely. Like Mike said, there's a lot of stuff floating around that probably does something similar to what you're trying to do. I have a tip here, and I remind people of this over and over and over, especially when you start talking about things like marketing. You should remember that the status quo is not doing anything, right? The status quo is not changing away from my current solution, or the status quo might just be completely ignoring this problem. All right, I had this thing. My job to be done is I need to clean up my yard. Competition is not just a lawn service. It's not just a better lawnmower. It's actually, maybe I don't want to clean up my yard at all. I want to sit and watch Netflix. So always remember that apathy is some of the biggest competition that you have to fight against. So this is all kind of nebulous and hard to wrap things around, right? So Mike and I thought, well, maybe if we actually had a problem that we could talk about, we could build something better. Or you know what, we could kind of model the process of making something here. So Mike, none of you know this about him, but Mike is an avid Pez collector. And he's going to talk to us a little bit about collecting. What are they called, Mike? Pez dispensers? I don't know.
Dispensers. I'll tell you exactly how they all came about. So we'll talk a little bit about Pez dispensers a little bit, and exactly why I'm interested in creating a product around Pez dispensers. I would imagine most of the people in the room actually are familiar with Pez dispensers, and we'll talk about why in a second, or we'll go ahead and talk about. Actually, let me describe what a Pez dispenser is, then we'll talk about collectors. First of all, Pez dispensers are a candy created in Austria. They were originally created for as a smoking cessation device, where if you were trying to quit smoking, you would take a little peppermint. Pfeffer, I can't pronounce that, but that's where the word Pez comes from. It's the some primary letters out of that Pfefferminz, Austrian word for peppermint, or German word perhaps. Anyway, the idea was that if you were trying to quit smoking, instead of grabbing for a cigarette, you'd grab for a mint, and that would help you avoid the nastiness of nicotine. Originally, the mints came in a little tin, and in 1927, originally Pez came out in 1927. Between 1927 and 1949, the mints came in just a little tin. In 1949, they created what's called a regular Pez dispenser. And as you can see, it kind of looks like a little cigarette lighter. And it was designed to dispense these little brick candies one by one. 7 years later, in 1957, the first character head was placed on top of a Pez dispenser. This is a witch. And this changed everything because Pez started licensing character heads on top of their dispensers. What this did is this created a giant collectible community for Pez dispensers, because people started collecting all the different Pez dispensers they could. People wanted the witch, the ghost, and the whatever for that year. And throughout the years, Pez has grown and grown and grown till currently they release all sorts of very branded merchandise with the latest superheroes associated with them, right? Like this brand new Marvel Eternals Pez set. Currently, Pez releases 70 million dispensers a year. So we can start to talk through that a little bit, and we can start to talk then about a collector. So throughout the years, and I'm sure it hasn't been 70 million dispensers a year for all the years, but certainly for the recent years, they've been pumping out a lot of Pez dispensers into the universe, where people are able to, for a very cheap price, a Pez dispenser costs generally $1 to $2. They're able to start collecting these little plastic character heads. It's a really fun, pretty low effort thing to do. So we can go to the next slide. So as you can imagine, people become quite obsessive about it and get in way over their head and spend probably way more money than their wife would like. And
asking
eventually
for a friend,
create, right? I mean,
no experience.
Not my wife, of course. And they end up with giant Pez dispenser collections. And as you might be able to deduce from my joking, this is my Pez dispenser collection. It's taken me years and years, but it's been really fun, and I enjoy collecting the Pez dispensers. But we can start to move on to some of the problems. So as I mentioned, I've been collecting these dispensers for a long time. And I also mentioned Pez is constantly releasing new dispensers into their line. So it's very difficult for me to know if I actually have all the dispensers that I should. For instance, in the middle part there's like the yellow, white, and red little candy guys. Do I have all of those? Or maybe the LeBron Space Jam dispenser number 1. I could wonder if there is a Space Jam dispenser number 2. And the answer is hopefully not. And there never should have been a Space Jam dispenser number 1 with LeBron. But you get my point anyway. The fact is, without having a really good knowledge of what's out in the Pez world, I have no idea no way to know if I actually have everything that is available right now.
And Mike, are there like catalogs or things like that? I mean, other collectibles have paper objects that people sent around. Do those exist for Pez dispensers?
Sure, that's a good thing. We were going to chat about this as one of the things that we need to define with our problem resume. And the fact is, yes, there are some paper catalogs. There are some rudimentary online databases. None of them are very complete, and none of them are very user-friendly or up-to-date. So while there are some products in the world, they're not really very good. Okay, so the next big problem with Pez dispensers, and I've been collecting for 20 years, so I'm pretty good at figuring these things out, but many of the different dispensers look very similar if you're not paying close attention. And in this case, the Mickey Mouse dispenser on the left, if you would find him out in the wild, he's worth about $25. That's not too bad. Compared to the current one on the right, which is worth $2. One of the main ways you can actually tell if a dispenser is older, it's not a foolproof way, is if it doesn't have feet on the bottom. You can see the one on the right in the red has those kind of feet coming out on the bottom that kind of help stabilize the dispenser. If it's missing that, like the one on the left, that can be a sign that it is an older dispenser that's worth more. But you really do have to know, because if you're not paying attention, you really could miss out on some really amazing Pez dispensers that really do look the same. If you go to the next slide. So again, Mickey Mouse, they all look pretty much the same, right? Same color face, same kind of ears or whatnot. If you happen to find a Mickey Mouse soft head out in the world, it could be worth $7,000. So it's really important that you are able to identify very minute details about the different dispensers, so that when you're out in the world, you could actually find, the magic and, get that, unbelievable barn find that, everybody dreams about.
All right. So I've been listening really closely. I hope everybody else has too. I'm going to try to recap the problem that we'd like to solve around collecting Pez dispensers specifically.
And you see that I entered that slide, Bryce, as the next slide. Oh, I guess you don't have the same deck as I do.
Apparently not. Sorry.
I had the same idea. I entered a recap.
So
slide,
let me attempt to recap it verbally.
Yep.
Lots of Pez dispensers have been released over the last 70-ish years. That's problem number 1. Problem number 2, nobody really thought of these as a collectible item, so keeping track of them was not important to the Pez company, obviously. And the lack of internet and the lack of ways to connect with other Pez collectors for a very long time has made this difficult at best to know if you're missing any, or to track down the ones that you are missing. And then finally, a lot of these dispensers look very similar. And so knowing what you have and knowing if it's unique or special is actually problematic for anybody who wants to collect these things, let alone anybody who would like to use them as an investment. Did I miss anything?
No, that's right on, really.
Okay. I'd say a secondary problem is that this is sort of an underrepresented collectible community when we talk about things like, sports cards or memorabilia or all the other kinds of things that people collect. So if there was more awareness, this also feels like something that greater awareness could produce better solutions to a lot of these things, and it'd be easier to crowdsource information and so on and so forth. All right, so those are kind of the problems that we've heard. And because our goal is to talk about creating solutions to problems, we kind of thought, well, maybe we should use this as a problem that we'd like to create some solutions to. All right, so that's why the slide that you saw earlier, talking about ideas are better with friends. I believe personally that brainstorming ideas are much better with friends. I don't think that we should always do brainstorming in a group, but I do think that having a group of people who have done brainstorming tends to produce better ideas, right? You get challenged, you get pushed a little bit to come up with something different. So we have a couple rules of brainstorming. Mike, do you want to?
Sure. So
you want to set the groundwork for how you brainstorm?
Yep. So just to refresh everybody's memory, and I'm sure you have all done brainstorming by the time you've got to this point in your lives. But sometimes you forget some of the important rules of brainstorming that make it more successful for everybody. And so we'll just refresh these. These are not our rules. These are the established rules for brainstorming, and we'll be following those throughout this next couple of slides. First thing is defer judgment. We want everybody to be free to come up with wacky and crazy, wild ideas. So if we are encouraging everybody to do that, the brainstorming is going to just be much more successful. And kind of along the lines of that, yes, and it's nice when ideas are flowing that we can build upon those ideas. So instead of building barriers where people aren't comfortable flowing and working together, make sure that everybody's encouraged and building upon everybody else's ideas. But it's also important to stay focused, right? We can build and build, but if we start to build towards the wrong product or we're brainstorming the wrong thing, we're not going to actually get what we need out of the exercise. So it is important when you're working through the brainstorming exercise to make sure that you have a goal in mind and that you stay focused on exactly what it is that you're trying to accomplish. The last two kind of important goals or rules that we want to mention are visual is kind of the best way to go with this. We don't want you scribbling out a bunch of words and stuff that can be difficult to grok. We want just some super simple diagrams that are able to visually scan. And we're not looking for beautiful artwork that you're going to submit to the Louvre. Really rough sketches that get your idea across in the simplest manner are what the outcome of these brainstorming exercises are all about.
Yeah, so I heard once that good artists borrow and great artists steal. That is kind of part of the game with brainstorming, is to let somebody else's idea be the spark for your evolution of that idea. Can you do it better? Can you do it smarter? But that last one, we kind of minimized it. Quantity over quality is Mike talked about this in like the context of drawing something, right? You don't need perfect shading in a 3D perspective. We're not hanging this on our wall. But that also relates to just ideas in general too. I had a teacher in school who said that you had to get the bad ideas out of the way before you could get to the good ones. And I was actually, true story, in college, I have a graphic design degree. I was made to throw away my first 10 ideas. Now think about that for a second. I had one, not let alone 10, right? And I kind of wanted to just get the assignment done and do the first one that I thought of. So, try to get the stuff that everybody's done already and the bad ideas out of the way. Dump as much content as you can into the world, and then after that, go back and figure out what has value and what you kind of should keep following up on. We have a little tip here, and that is adding urgency. It turns out that your brain works differently when you're under a deadline, when you're like approaching a deadline. There really is no minute like the last minute. I'm not asking you to procrastinate, but I'm telling you that adding some sort of time boxing, especially with something like a visual timer that really lets you see what's going on, makes a huge difference in how your brain approaches things like this.
So it's a bit of a sidetrack, and me and Bryce were talking about this subject yesterday, and he's showing this time timer, I think it's called, that he likes. And I went to Amazon and I bought this really cool timer that just allows you to set a certain time, place it down, and go on with your work and time box it. That's called the Pomodoro method for some people, or there's probably other names for that. Having that kind of incentive to get something done and work through that particular time box is really valuable. And I kind of wanted to give a plug for this particular product by MOOAS, which I'm pretty delighted with because it seems just so well designed and useful for creating urgency.
And if you don't go out and buy a timer, here's a nifty little trick that I learned a while ago. Google's here for everything for you. If you type timer into the Google search, there's actually a little stopwatch and timer that you can type whatever number you want to right in your browser window and start a timer. So don't ever believe that you don't have a timer handy, because even if you don't have your phone, there's a super easy way to get a timer.
And we actually might suggest that you do not have your phone for these exercises, actually, but that's another side. That's a bit of a sidetrack. So now that we've decided, now that we've defined kind of the ground rules, we'll talk about what a brainstorming group activity might look like and how you might actually go about doing this sort of thing. I also wanted to mention that we're going to highlight some different tools throughout each of these different presentations. The tools don't matter really. There are lots of different tools for doing all the different product design and research tasks that we're describing here. Some of them are really useful. Some of them are really wonderful. And there are a lot of ways that you can do online brainstorming and stuff. In this case, this is Miro, which you may have heard about. It has a template that allows you to create a group activity for brainstorming. So even if you don't remember all the rules and the format of the things that we're telling you, the tools are really well designed already to help you do these tasks. So I guess I'll just go through it real quick and we'll describe the task. And then we'll actually go through and we'll do the task. We'll actually do a formal brainstorming task. So again, just to kind of describe how a group brainstorming task would happen. We would give everybody a set amount of time to create a certain number of ideas. We're going to be very directed on what it is that we want to see, so that we're going to try to create something that's specific. And then also we're hopefully going to be able to work on each other's ideas like we talked about. Once everybody's had the time to generate their ideas, we're going to put all the ideas on a board. We're going to talk through them a little bit, and then we're going to pick the best ones. So if you think about if these were Post-it notes, we might start to move some around and start to highlight which ideas seem to be the ones that are going to be good for us.
Yeah, and Mike said if these were Post-it notes, the kind of cool thing is that you can do this in a physical room with a group of people on a wall. That is the reason that Post-it notes come in big stacks like this. Also notice that in Mike's example and in a real Post-it note, you don't really, you've got 3 inches, three square inches of Post-it noteness. That means that you can't do something really detailed and deep. You've got to write one idea, maybe draw a picture of the idea, but in this case, the one we're talking about is probably words, right? But 2 to 5 words, not your thesis project, right? This is the point is that you got a whole stack of these little guys and they all should represent one kind of unique idea. Okay. This is not the one that we are going to do. The exercise that we would love to do with you is something that is termed Crazy Eights. Now, you remember our scavenger hunt at the beginning, and I'm kind of hoping that our wonderful host can join us, and possibly all of us will do this. We can kind of play with the game. So hopefully everybody found a piece of paper and a writing utensil. I really like Sharpies. We'll talk about why I like Sharpies later, but paper. Ooh, Mike got Post-its. Paper. All right. So what I want you to do is fold the piece of paper in half. I don't really care which way you do it. And then fold the piece of paper in half again. And bear with me. Fold it in half one more time. Now, I know what you're thinking. We were brainstorming, not making paper airplanes. So, because we're not making paper airplanes, unfold the piece of paper. And we have 8 little squares. Here's what's cool about this project. Each one of those little squares is where we are going to draw or write an idea. Now, the catch with this, remember how I said time boxing is important? We typically do 1 minute per little idea. That's not a lot of time, and that's kind of the fun part about this. So, let's do 4 ideas instead of 8, just for the sake of time here. So I'm going to set a 4-minute timer, and we are going to all sketch ideas to solve the Pez dispenser collector problems that we discussed, right? So there's a lot of Pez dispensers. They all look the same. People don't know what's out there. You might be sitting on a gold mine, and Mike is looking for the one you have.
Yes. And by the way, if anybody does have, please contact me privately for
and appraisal for less than $7,000.
Appraisals and early purchase offers. Understanding what you have is also an important question that is hard to solve as another problem. So I'm ready with my.
All right, I'm hitting the start button on my timer, and it's really too bad we don't have any, cool music here.
Can you put the timer up on the screen? I don't know if it's going to.
No, I cannot. I'm sorry.
Fair enough. That's okay.
I would like to put the timer up on my screen.
I'll set my own timer just so I know.
Okay. You're down to 3.5 seconds or 3.5 minutes now. So
yeah, I know I've talked too long.
Everybody watching this can be bored later while we do this, but hopefully they're playing along.
Doing this themselves. That's the plan. Yeah. Even if you're watching this on video, please spend this time right now. We still want to hear your ideas later, after the fact.
And then another tip, sometimes I like to name these so that if you hand them to people or put them up, it's a little easier to just come up with what's going on. Crazy Hits is also fun because you realize very quickly how few ideas you actually had.
I've even been thinking about this ahead of time, and I have 2 ideas really quick, and then I'm like, I got to come up with 2 other ones. But that's kind of fun because it forces me to kind of think outside the box.
Remember, you got to get the bad ideas out so the good ideas can flow. And we're down to 50 seconds. All right, 20 seconds. No pressure. And 3, 2, 1. Ooh. All right. Mike, Sahel, how'd that feel?
It felt pretty good. Still just a little bit of extra time. Edge is here now too. I saw a little bit of extra time to finish up my last one, but I felt pretty good.
It's kind of difficult.
It's really interesting to see like how little ideas we do have.
Right?
But then when you give yourself a timer, you kind of force yourself to like think about it rather than being lazy about it.
It also, when you do that, I have noticed that it forces you to, that idea that I thought was dumb. Right? I'm just going to put it out there because I need to fill that space. Does anyone want to share a particularly cool idea that they had?
Halfway through, I kind of forgot what exactly the problem was that we were solving. So that kind of stopped me from the last idea a little bit. But
I was thinking that, so we had 2 problems. One was that there are a lot of pest dispensers, and we don't know when the whole we have the whole collection of a certain pest dispenser, and one of them may be like something quite unique. So maybe like having a digitized library of it, and some way like having people rent it out or paying them some money would be a good way to like have a collection of all the pest dispensers, or maybe having some digitized versions like, I don't know, the NFTs and stuff, and trying to share it around with people would be an interesting thing. But yeah, these are some really crazy wild ideas.
Did you draw that? Did you like capture that in any sort of? I mean, I'd like to see what you drew for that. It doesn't matter.
Yeah,
Does it have to be pretty?
It's just a small little funny thing. It's just like a digitized version of a library or like a TV thing.
That's good. Yeah, I mean,
I did something similar.
This is really interesting when you do it as a group too. Yeah, there you go. I kind of had a somewhat similar idea. And this is what's really interesting about this when you do it as a group is you find out how everybody's always like, my idea, you got to sign an NDA, you've got to like do all this kind of stuff before you can see my idea. Everybody else has already had that idea too. Right. So it comes down to the fact that the person that's willing to put in the work to figure it out. And I'm saying that I had a similar idea, right? Like, this is an augmented reality thingy that looked at Mike's shelf and said, "Hey, this is what's missing, right? What's in that hole?"
Mhm.
Mike, same thing, right? And
Missing the Pez dispenser
we
idea. So
did not talk about this ahead of time. Okay. We didn't know what ideas we were going to come up with. So I look at this and I'm like, well, what when I'm having to brainstorm like this, what kind of technology exists? What do I know about that would make things work? And one of the things that I know a lot about is data, specifically how hard it is sometimes to get data. So the idea of a catalog or an online library sounds amazing on first pass, but then I'm like, well, how do we get that data? So I bumped into this idea of gamifying the process. Why not create a little app that asks you to take a picture from 5 different set angles, right? You top, left, right, front, back. And by doing that, it's able to actually look through the catalog and identify something new. So if we gamify that, Mike gets extra points because he's uploading ones that the catalog hasn't seen yet. Maybe he turns around and spends those points on more Pez dispensers or something like that. But
so I've actually thought about this, before we get here, but you can gamify it quite in another way, in that you could develop experts in the community that are good at identifying Pez dispensers. So just like in Stack Overflow or other places, people like points. We can give them points and status when they've identified a certain number of Pez dispensers for us correctly, and they become our image classifiers, basically. But we could talk about we will talk about some of these, the challenges and stuff as we evolve our products. Probably what we're going to think about doing over the next couple of weeks is developing a product that will help us catalog Pez dispensers, and we'll start to develop that idea into actual implementation. Is the
another shameless plug to
name of
tune in
the,
next time for more of this
Yes.
process. But thanks, guys,
Exactly.
for playing along. We really do think brainstorming is better with friends. To kind of move along a little bit, we talked about sketching before we really needed to talk about sketching. But sometimes when you're brainstorming, we do this thing where we create, a little window into something, but maybe I picked one of these ideas. Maybe I like it enough that I want to flush it out. Sort of that next step of brainstorming, we put up Be the Movie Director here because this is where you get to start to set up the story of your solution. Not just, wireframes for something like an app, but think of it like a storyboard. What is going on around the app when this happens? I mentioned an augmented reality idea. Well, that's all fine and good as long as there's a shelf with a hole in it that's missing the Pez dispenser, right? Mike's setup works really well in that augmented reality interface. If I just keep all my Pez dispensers in a box somewhere, suddenly the augmented reality stuff doesn't work as well. So when we're doing these things, it's important to really actually draw what's going on. Everybody says, well, I can't draw. Like, hey, Bryce, you went to school to be an art major. Of course you can draw. It's not a problem. That's actually not the point. Even just boxes and arrows are actually super powerful at conveying your ideas. And you will find actually that when you draw boxes and arrows, people who are thinking about your idea spend more time paying attention to your idea instead of whatever version of your idea they have in their head from reading it. So this gives you that chance to tell your story, to figure out what the situation is, do remember to keep track of time, right? Does time pass in between me submitting my photos of the Pez dispensers and finding out that I had a unique original one? Or does it not? What happens if time passes? What's happening around you? Are there kids running in front of your picture, knocking over the table, knocking over the Pez dispensers? All of those things kind of change how we interact with something. And then finally, I kind of suggest not using a lot of words. And the reason I suggest not using a lot of words is, again, because people try to read the words and not pay attention to what your big idea is. And kind of the way that we keep us out of the weeds, I've mentioned several times these Sharpies. You will probably notice that it's really hard to draw anything overly detailed with a Sharpie. Unless, of course, your piece of paper is, the size of a wall. Most of us don't have a wall-sized piece of paper to draw on. Drawing on walls with a Sharpie is not recommended, but this kind of keeps us thinking big picture, right? You can't draw out all the words on a screen. You can't show a cursor easily. You've got to go really big, and I don't know, it's kind of hard to see, but those were the sketches that I did. They're boxes, literally boxes with Pez dispensers that could pass for a lamp or a podium. You pick, right? So this is sort of our tip for getting out of your head, but starting to flush out your idea in a certain way. Mike, any thoughts? This is the end of our why session.
So no, I do think we want to share our last slide, which I think has some resources on it.
It does indeed have some resources.
So we do encourage you to check out some of these resources. We will always share a slide at the end of our presentation so that you don't have to worry about some of these things ahead of time. We encourage you to please reach out to us on Twitter if you'd like. Submit your questions via chat. If you have questions you'd like us to address the next time, please reach out. That'll be 2 weeks from now, and we're looking forward to chatting then.
Yeah, and I mean, I love all of this stuff, but this fake it before you make it concept is really near and dear to my heart. Mostly because I have imposter syndrome like crazy. But no, faking it before you're making it is kind of the thing that keeps me going every day. Let's run through these resources real quick, and then if there were any questions that came up during our conversation, we can attempt to answer those as well.
Although, I would say that we are up against the hour, so I am conscious of that. I don't want to go too far over, just to give you a time check.
Thank you.
We started late too.
Digital Post-it notes. The thing that we showed was Google's Jamboard. Super cool way to get ideas on a wall when you can't be in the same room. Miro can also be used for that. That's the second one, but it can be used for so much more. Drawing boxes and arrows and really like actually doing a lot of brainstorming stuff. We barely touched on personas. They're kind of important. And this up close and persona.com, which is a very punny and fun URL, has a lot more information on personas, as well as some cool tools on how to make them. And then Samply is it's built for people at this stage of their product journey, and it will help you do things like personas, journey maps, kind of what the flow is around your project and product, and it helps you do it in a story-based format. And then finally, Clayton Christensen's book, Competing Against Luck, completely changed the way I think about projects, about what I make and what I do, and having that available, I would love to have everybody read it. Phil, were there any questions that came up?
Thank you so much, guys, for conducting this session. It was really helpful, and we also got the students got the chance to like have a brainstorming session. So they also got the experience of what brainstorming is like, and it's not just theoretical stuff; it's actually some practical stuff to learn and apply in our lives. So one of the questions was that, like, how can we like generate new ideas if our information about that topic is limited? So for instance, the best dispensers today, like many people might not have known about the best dispensers, but they did the brainstorming. So would you advise them to like just do the brainstorming and put a time bound to yourself, or like try to research about it before trying to come up with some new ideas?
I'll let Bryce answer that. I mean, well, no,
Very hard question. I have, there's an argument for both, right? And it kind of depends on how you feel as a person and what you think of the topic. There are some things that we bump into, that all of us bump into, but we have different experiences around them, right? The ATM machine. You understand why it's there and you understand what it's doing, but we all have different experiences. In that case, I kind of feel like you should just jump in. And the reason that I say that is because I think you kind of come up with some of these ideas that you weren't expecting. And then there are other times where you need to know a little bit of research. My personal bias is that you should find a person you can talk to about it instead of reading what's been written on the internets. My rationale for that is that you will almost always have follow-up questions, or you will need context that you can't get from what we consider traditional research.
I will just add to everything Bryce just said, which I think is correct, is so even if you don't have particular knowledge of what we're brainstorming with, you can probably create some pretty similar associations with other things like collecting bobbleheads or collecting, baseball cards we already discussed. There are correlations that may at least allow you to frame your reference so that you can kind of get some ideas. And that can be really good, kind of, as Bryce was saying, like to have someone that has not specific knowledge and can bring fresh ideas.
Got it. And for the next session, we have the fake it before you make it. So how do you think like that plays into this question? That you did talk about, like, at times we should try like researching about it, and sometimes we should just try diving into it. So, but should we also try like faking ourselves that we don't know about it, but still just dive into it and see what comes out of it?
I mean, really, that's what's going to be our next session.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you bringing that up. But the fact is, we're going to fake some of the stuff that we don't know as a specific method for figuring out the things we don't know. So,
right. It's the trick is that it teaches you where you were wrong. Because it's actually really hard to find that stuff out.
And as you're developing products, it's important to not go in with a lot of assumptions. I think is kind of what we're talking about here. Is sometimes it's really great if you can not know everything before you start to build the product.
Makes sense.
It sounds like we have a question in the chat. Maybe Edge might know it.
Yeah, so this kind of ties into that a little bit and has mostly to do with the beginning steps of brainstorming. But let's say you're trying to come up with an idea for a new product, or you're just trying to come up with creative ideas to further a product you've already created. As we saw from that exercise, right, some people can start brainstorming and hit just a creative block. And obviously putting a time limit on it does help stimulate those ideas. But are there any other things you can do if you start hitting creative blocks like that?
This sounds super weird, but all the brainstorm type stuff that I do, I typically will bring in something like paper clips, Legos, anything that you can use your hands for, and just let everybody have 20 minutes before we do anything to play. That will do so much to unlock your creativity, right? We threw you in and we said just go, but we didn't give you any of the tools or mental state kind of stuff to help you get started. I think you'll find that if you do that kind of thing, there's a lot less oh no, I can't be creative. The other thing that we do typically is we'll say, okay, that was really hard. We get it. Let's everybody put up their work and talk about it, and then we do it again. We do the 8 minutes again. And you'll find that in that first set, nobody had 8 things. But in the second set, just about everybody has 30. Right? Like I ran out of paper. So sometimes just getting that trigger is what's needed too.
Yeah.
So a little bit along the same lines of triggering and getting the ideas flowing is as a pre-exercise, you can start to just write down things like foods you like or things that everybody knows or just something that's really easy to get ideas flowing so that you're kind of in the idea of just throwing stuff out. Everybody, what's your favorite candy bar or whatever, easy to remember candy bars at first until everybody's, you can't say Snickers twice or whatever. So whatever it is, just ways that you get people's ideas flowing that, and just that they're comfortable with kind of thinking can also kind of help prime the pump a little bit so that it's a game. It's not work.
It's a really good point. And it's something that we should all remember, right? Okay, go come up with ideas is really pretty scary. Brainstorming should not be scary based on Mike's rules. It's a safe place kind of thing. So anything you can do to help the group be in a better mindset when you start is going to be well received.
Yep, got it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yep. That's all we have for today. Thank you so much, guys, for providing us such amazing information, and I hope it helped everyone. And make sure that everyone joins us next 2 weeks later, December 2. Fake it before you make it. That would be an amazing session again. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Have a good night.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us. It was fun. See you, folks.